Everybody, welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup, where we're meeting just about weekly here online. Today we have with our presenter is Karl Hughes. Karl is a former CTO turned content marketer and founder of Draft.dev, where he helps technology companies reach software engineers through content marketing. In the talk today, Karl will share some of what he's learned through his career as an engineering executive and content marketer. I think very on brand. Karl, I see you have draft shirt, and what does it say? Technical blogging or?
Yeah, done for you.
Technical blogging done for you. Excellent.
Yeah.
So Karl, thanks for joining and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. And thanks everybody for having me. I'm super excited to, it's funny. I've given numerous talks to software engineering groups. This was, I think, the first one to marketers. And so I don't know if this is going to be good, bad, or I'm going to be way too nerdy for y'all. I don't know where I'm going to stand. So that's, just bear with me as I figure it out.
Okay.
I'm gonna I'm gonna get my slides going, and I shared these in Meetup. If you want to follow along, I've also got a lot of links in there, and that might be helpful if you are wanting to copy paste some of those links right out, or you want to find reference something later. So just a quick intro about me, and as Dennis said, I've spent the last 10 years or so as a software engineer, engineering manager, and then most recently a CTO at a small tech startup in Chicago, where I live. And so during that time, I was mostly focused on hands-on software development, actually building stuff, architecting stuff. And we used, and increasingly over my career, I saw the use of more and more software development tools and how much they could do for software developers. And I thought it was a really interesting shift over the software landscape, I guess. And so along the way, when I'd find a cool tool, I would write about it, and I'd write about my personal blog, and I'd put something up there, or I would maybe write about how I solved a certain programming problem or even a people management problem. And I just did this for fun. I mean, at first I was not very good. Like I went to school for engineering, and so I didn't get a ton of writing in school, but I always liked it. And I just figured, what the heck, put it out there. And so I did this for 10 years. And when you do something long enough, you start to get good at it, even if you're not that good to start. So I was pretty good as a writer. And so I started to do a little more ambitious things with my writing on the side. So in 2017, I wrote a book called Building Your First PHP Application with Docker. Super technical. It's not something that I expect a lot of you know about, and that's totally fine. It's self-published too, so it's nothing glamorous. But it gave me some insight into what it takes to really compose like a big work and actually get it out the door and kind of out to people. And so over 1,000 programmers have downloaded this around the world. Another guy reached out to me, translated into Russian. And as this thing starts taking off and getting a little bit of visibility in its niche, companies started reaching out to me. So in 2017 also, I started getting reached out to by software development companies that had technical products that they wanted marketing material created for that was aimed at software developers. So one of the first ones was a company called CodeShip. What they do is a continuous integration tool that software developers use to get their software tested and put out to their servers. And so CodeShip came out and they said, look, we really like what you're writing out there on your own blogs. Would you like to get paid for it? And I didn't even think this was an option for me. This was not even on my radar at the time. Like, I'm a software developer making good money as a software developer. So I didn't realize people got paid to write on the internet. It's just like how naive the rest of the world is. I know in content marketing, y'all are like, yeah, of course. But most of us don't know that. And so I started doing this more often as I got time, and just for fun on the side, I'd make a few $100 extra a month. It was like a good way to get my name out there. And in 2020, I decided it was time I just kind of was doing this on the side, and I just decided I want to try this full time. Like, what does it take to become a full-time writer who knows about software engineering? There just aren't many people doing that. And so I figured I would go ahead and brand myself as an agency and kind of it started off basically just me writing for a few clients. But it grew really quickly because there's a ton of demand for this kind of technical content written by subject matter experts. And so now we've got about 25 clients. They're all Series A, Series B funded startups that are trying to build tools for software developers, doing content, investing in content marketing. And we work with about 50 or 60 software developers around the world who write articles for our clients. I've got a couple editors, got hiring an account manager now. So it's just grown really, really quickly. And along the way, I've kind of learned how to start as a hands-on developer, writer, and kind of start to hire a team of writers and start to scale that up. And so that's what I'm going to kind of share today. It's like how you could do this and basically replicate what we've done over the last few months at your company if you do want to hire and work with subject matter experts. So I want to do a quick 10-second introductions if everybody's willing to do this. So I'm going to kind of go around the room. Let's see what the best way to do this is. I think I can see everybody here. Okay, we know Dennis, so we'll skip him. Who's next here? See if I can see names. Anybody want to go?
Can I make an intro of sorts that folks might not know?
Yes, do it.
So in a sense, I'm like you, Karl, maybe not as recent, but I have a degree in computer science and I started my career as a developer. I made the transition to marketing in 2005, so it was quite a while ago. But I think it's interesting to be able to blend a software development background and marketing. In some cases, I don't write anything technical to reach the software developer, but at least I have the mindset that helps me understand how they think.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just going to go down the list of participants. Kathy Clark, you there? You want to say hi? And if you don't, you can just ignore me and then I'll move on to the next person. Brian Scanlon, how about you?
Hi, Brian Scanlon, Look Left Marketing, and I'm a creative writing PhD dropout who then formed a technical PR career.
Nice.
Can't really explain that, but that's what happened.
Craig?
I'm Craig Fisk. I'm in San Jose. One of 4 people doing a startup on virtual networking. We're writing in Vue and Google Cloud. And yeah, it's marmalade.ai if anybody wants to look up the site. Marmalade like the jam.
Cool. Jeff?
Not out yet.
Is there many Jeff or is just me? Because I have normally when I go in this, Jeff is such a common name. But anyhow, I'll go.
Yeah.
So, I'm Jeff Rigo. I'm one of the co-founders of Hushly. B2B marketers use our software to increase conversions on existing traffic on their landing page. And like Dennis, I have a computer science degree. I'm actually started off as a biochemist and then moved into lead generation. So as a triangulation of that is me.
Cool. I'm not as unique as I thought. That's awesome. I love it.
I didn't know that, Jeff. That's amazing.
Yeah. Nicole?
Yeah, hi. I'm a content writer who works for B2B tech companies. I got my start as a founding editor of an engineering magazine, and I'm an English major. So I'm the opposite of you guys.
Nice.
And so, yeah, and I got into marketing about 2002.
Cool. Pierre?
Good afternoon. My name is Pierre Du Bois, founder of Zamana Analytics. I also write for CMS Wire with Dennis as well too. This is kind of a surprise. We didn't realize. This is a really timely topic. I do a lot of analytics, helping small businesses on their digital marketing and around Google Analytics. But one of the things that grew for me in the last 12 years is, just as Karl said, there's been a big demand for technical writing and being able to connect to take those ideas and connect them into something that a manager who needs to understand it, but doesn't necessarily have to understand the weeds of it, and trying to figure out how to convey that to customers and so forth. So this is a very timely talk, because Karl's right. This has been growing for a while and probably accelerating now that everyone's worked at home. So
yeah,
great.
Todd,
talk. Looking forward.
Thanks.
To it.
Yeah, so I'm an ex-engineer, but I'm of the mechanical type. And had a long, convoluted journey from design engineering to digital marketing consulting, which is primarily what my business is now.
Cool. Andy? All right.
Andy Grimet. I work for Pepper Data, which is a cloud workload and application metrics analytics company. I came out of support, then moved to sales engineering, and am now in marketing and do a lot with content marketing, content strategy.
Cool. Beth?
Beth McCullough and work for Access Security and heading up their demand generation. And part of that also includes content strategy, so targeting security and IT audiences. So I was curious to see what I could learn here.
Nice. Frank?
Hi, Frank Shane. I'm in sales. I work for a company called Cision. So we own PR Newswire. So kind of interesting to learn, but also I see a trend of people using PR Newswire or Business Wire, those releases, to send out content, because you can hit basically 40 or 50 million. I mean, my company claims 1 billion people potentially, but it's just interesting of using that as a vehicle to deliver. So.
Nice. Yeah. John, I think you're next on the list I'm looking at.
Hey, I'm a former journalist, now doing content marketing mostly for tech companies.
Cool. Okay. Linda?
I worked with Dennis for many years. I'm in demand generation marketing for the most part, currently consulting on projects here and there. Have a lot of interest in all of the topics and a long-time attendee. So
nice. Good to meet you. Nicole, I don't think I got you yet.
I think Nicole
already
went already.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You know,
okay.
this list, I thought it was going to stay static, but the list of participants keeps jumping around. Who hasn't gone yet? So this is not working. So just say hi and introduce yourself if you haven't gone.
I'll say hi. Hi, I'm Margie Agan with Centerboard Marketing. I'm on the English major brain side of the family, but I work with B2B tech companies that often have really complex products and services. And so I interview a lot of subject matter experts who are developers and engineers and, product experts, and then try to distill technical language for non-technical audiences, business decision makers, and kind of extract the value from the very technical language that those folks often speak in.
Awesome. All right. Did I miss anybody? I think I may have missed one person or somebody didn't go yet.
I'll say hi real quick. Oops, sorry.
Oh, we had a couple. Sorry.
I can't tell, so I figure if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and go. My name is Roselle Cronin. I know we talked right before everybody else came on. I am the content marketing lead at a tech company called Innovate, which is technically out of Colorado, but I work out of my house outside of Tampa, Florida. So hello from the East Coast. And we're an ERP and cloud software implementation company. So it's like, it's very complex, very interesting, but very complex. So I'm just excited to actually be able to hear a discussion from folks that not only, that's not going to only focus on B2B marketing, which I know is a whole other animal than B2C, which is what I'm a little bit more accustomed to, but just, good Lord, tech in itself is a whole other universe anyway. So, so I'm kind of excited to actually, talk to folks who do that kind of marketing.
Awesome. Okay. Does anybody else want to introduce themselves? I think we have one more, right?
I do. I'm Robin Anderson.
Robin.
My company's Fly to Store. My business partner and I, my background's all business, but what we do is we work with early stage startups to help them launch the product in the market. And a lot of work we do is around content, messaging framework, etc. So that's what I do.
Anybody else?
Last one, I think.
Go
Kathy Clark, how are you? Coming to you from snowy Cleveland. Good to see some friendly faces. I work at a company called Kalant, which we do DevOps on demand. And I'm the Senior Marketing Director, AKA Marketing Department of One. So good to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so I like taking time to get to know who I'm talking to. It's helpful for me to have some context, but also I want everybody to feel comfortable speaking. It's okay, you can say something, and I don't want this to be a one-way. Okay, but I'm going to get right into it because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know it's lunch break. You probably have other things you want to do this afternoon. I'm going to hit 4 main sections here, and I'll try to take little breaks between, but they're going to be pretty tight timing wise. So we'll just kind of like get through it. The first is coming up with technical ideas for content. So how do you actually, if you're not a subject matter expert yourself, how do you come up with a viable idea for a piece of content that people that are in your target market will care about? There's finding subject matter experts to write for you, or even to interview if you want to go that route. Both, I think, are viable options. I'm going to talk more about finding them to write for you, but certainly we do some interviewing too. And then managing and motivating your subject matter expert creators. So if you're going to work with non-traditional freelancers to write articles like we do, it is a little bit different, and you have to think about their motivations and what they're good at and not good at. And then finally, how do you promote content to a technical audience? This is probably, I'm probably not going to do this as much justice as I'd like to, but there are places where engineers hang out on the internet and you can get your content in there, but you have to kind of be careful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so first, I'm just going to kind of say what I think technical content is, and when I think of technical content marketing, what kind of falls, what buckets this might fall into. It could be any kind of content, right? It can be social media, it can be blog posts, it could be ebooks, it can be videos, whatever. All that is viable. Like engineers, software engineers, or technical people, they're reading that same or consuming that same content that everybody else is. They may use different channels sometimes, but typically they're interested in a lot of the same things. I'm really interested to see, just as a side note, like where video goes in the future, because the younger generation of content consumers seems to love short form video, and we have not figured out how to do that, like generally speaking, for technical content yet. So I would love to see where that ends up. And if anybody has thoughts, that's like my future minded path that I'm like thinking about, like how do we build for that in the future? Anyway, but what I think of technical content marketing, I think of stuff that's genuinely helpful, comes from an authoritative source, and is educational, tends to be educational in nature. It's got to sort of fit those buckets to be really good content marketing. And so the problem is a lot of typical content, well, a lot of low quality content marketing is kind of just fluff, right? A lot of fluff words, keywords. That's what's been like, that's what a lot of engineers think of content marketing. Honestly, they have this kind of like dirty association with it. But if done right, and it comes from a subject matter expert, there's no reason that it can't be really substantive and really valuable to your audience, which is what you want to do because it builds trust. So the first thing is coming up with ideas that are authentic, actually useful, and can help educate your audience, right? The first method I'll talk about is keyword audits. This is a typical pathway in content marketing, right? We go to Ahrefs or Google Keyword Planner. We go look at what is a high volume and low competition keyword, and we try to come up with some article ideas that will address it, right? And this is perfectly viable. You can go this path. The problems that I see with this only going this way when you're doing technical content marketing is that it tends to lend itself to a lot of top of funnel, beginner level content. So what I mean is, if you go look up the search volume for a term like what is a Kubernetes, I don't know, pod, there's going to be a ton of volume. There may even be low competition for that. I don't know, because it's not a super purchase intent heavy keyword. So it might actually be something you could rank for. But what you're going to get is a bunch of traffic from junior developers who can't make decisions on buying things. It may not be actually that valuable to your ultimate goal down the funnel. So you just have to think about those trade-offs. Now, there's certainly a good case to be made for ranking highly for any key term around Kubernetes if you care about Kubernetes, but it doesn't mean automatically that it's going to translate into dollars in sales. So you have to think about this when you're doing keyword audit-based content. The other thing that, yeah, so I kind of talked about the entry-level stuff. I mean, that to me is the big trade-off there. And you have to decide, I like it as a blend, but I don't think it's the only kind of content you should produce. I think you'll end up with a lot of really, I don't know, light and junior level content if you go this way only. The next method that a lot of my clients do is they go out to the community. This can be as simple as going on Stack Overflow and looking for what questions are people searching for around Kubernetes. So you're going to see some that are like really common questions. You might see some really controversial questions that get a lot of back and forth and people suggesting all sorts of alternative answers. But you can also go out to other communities like Reddit, Hacker News. You can go to GitHub and open source projects. And if you don't know what all this means, just feel free to ping me later. I'm not going to try to get into all the specific details in communities, but just kind of think about it this way. If your audience is out there and they're talking about problems they have, could you get out there and start listening to those problems and start figuring out, are there some good content ideas for these problems? The good the things you get out of this are you tend to find stuff that would be hard for a typical content marketer to replicate or find because they're not in those communities. They're not living in Stack Overflow asking and answering these questions every day. So I like them for hidden gems. And the downside to these are that you're not going to be necessarily targeting high volume keywords, but they could be pretty high intent if it comes down to like, how do I actually, like, let's say, how do I monitor the logs coming out of a Kubernetes pod, right? Maybe that's a highly searched term on Stack Overflow, but it has 0 search volume from Ahrefs because it's such a small amount in the grand scheme of Google traffic that it doesn't even register. But it could be great if you're a Kubernetes logging service because that is super high intent. It's basically like they're ready to buy. They just need to find the answer. So you can help them out and kind of get them right in the middle of your funnel. You can even then sort of flip it around and use Stack Overflow or these communities as a way to promote that blog post once you finish it. So if your blog post answers a question that's on Stack Overflow, you sort of take a snippet of that blog post, post it as your answer in Stack Overflow, and then a link maybe to your further blog post. Stack Overflow has like mixed feelings about how, linking to off-site content, but still you can get your point across and do that, and it can be helpful. It can be something worth trying. Okay, and then the last kind of content idea generation that I see clients use a lot is augmenting their support and sales documentation. So let's say that you go talk to your sales team and they say, look, our customers love us, but they get stuck around implementing us with service Y. So let's say you're a Kubernetes logging service and they're always having questions about this Kubernetes, uptime monitoring service or something. You're like, should we use you guys in tandem or should we use you? Are you a replacement for them? Like they don't know the relationship between two services, let's say. This is a great opportunity for a blog post. It's questions that your actual customers are asking on a regular basis. And so it's going to help them get further down that content funnel down towards like, let's actually make the sale. We do this as well with clients that are looking to sell to multiple different stakeholders. So if your service costs $5K a month, let's say, it's likely that the engineering team has to sign off, but so does the product team and some director level or C-level person who has that big budgetary spend that they can go for this. So in that case, we might write some of the technical content aimed at the technical decision maker, but there might be other content marketers either at the company or externally who write for those other decision makers. So it could be that this is kind of part of a whatever you call that, like a multi-tiered sales process. Obviously, the upside to this is it's a lot of bottom of the funnel content. You're getting people right down where they're ready to purchase. The downside is that it's, again, pretty low volume likely, and it's not likely to bring in people who are super unfamiliar with your product to begin with, because they're not searching for how do I implement X Kubernetes log service. They're searching for more general terms. So honestly, the best content strategies tend to be a blend of these things, but you have to decide where you're missing pieces of that content funnel. Do you need more top of funnel traffic? Do you need more closing? Like that, this is kind of what content marketing is. So I'm not going to, y'all all know way more about this than me. This is just what I see from working with clients. So that's part one, coming up with ideas. I hope you got a couple good takeaways from that. Part two, how do you find subject matter experts who can write about those ideas? So you come up with some ideas, you say like, look, we've got 10 or 20 blog posts that would be great. There's some top of funnel content, there's some middle of funnel content, there's some stuff that's going to close them, but it's all super technical. Like if you're someone with an English background, unless you've gone and taught yourself to code, which certainly would be awesome, it's really hard to write a like deep Kubernetes based article. Even if you go interview an expert, it's pretty hard because, and I honestly, this is like, I'll just like put it on myself rather than try to, I'm not saying anything negative about English majors at all. What I'm saying is like, if you told me to write a data science article, I would have no clue where to start, right? It's not my field. I don't know anything about it. I could interview a data scientist and I could probably hack together something that sounded okay, but I would not be the subject matter expert you'd want writing that article. So what you have to think about is like, how do we find people who are already familiar with these topics and possibly interested in writing about them? Fiverr and Upwork don't work. So you can do that if you want to try, but I've tried it many times and they don't work. Every client who comes to me says, I've tried these things and they don't work. And so I have yet to hear a really good experience. But if you do find one, like a person on Upwork who's a really great technical writer and they can actually do this, go for it. And what I always say is like, you're getting a heck of a deal if you can find it because they're really hard to find. They're really hard to keep. But anyway, so steer clear. Typical SEO-based keyword writers are not going to give you that subject matter expertise or the authority that you really need to resonate with a technical audience. So what happens is let's say they write a piece of content that looks okay to you, but they mix up the terms database and cache. Well, any software engineer with 5 or 6 years of experience knows the difference between those terms and will call you out on it, or just ignore the article entirely because it's like clearly not correct and not written by someone with any knowledge of the subject. And then they can find that in the byline too. If the person, even if you don't write much about them, if they go look that person up and they're like a freelance content writer and they've never done any software development, there's kind of a disconnect there, right? So the route we go, I guess before I get to what we do, there's another couple ways that actually do work pretty well if you have the resources to do it. So option one is you get your engineers in-house, maybe your support engineers, your QA engineers, maybe it's even like the engineering managers who maybe they have some bandwidth to do this kind of thing, and you ask them to maybe write an article every month. Again, most clients come to me and say, like, we tried that and it was just really hard to get them to do it consistently because their main drivers, their KPIs, right, are advancing the product forward, not getting marketing content written. And so it's just a disconnect between goals. The other option, if you do have budget, is to start hiring technical writers, editors, and like the whole 9 yards. So DigitalOcean is a good example of this. They're big enough that they can hire technical writers and also freelance writers. So they've written thousands of tutorial type blog posts, but they hire full-time people to do that. And these are people with both engineering and technical skills, technical writing skills rather. So it's certainly possible, but usually for the clients that I talk to, again, they're in like the Series A and Series B range startups. They don't have the budget set aside for that kind of hire yet. So it's one of those things, like once you get to a size, great, you can do it. But before that size, you've got to figure out some kind of stopgap solution. And so here's what we do at Draft. And you can basically take this exact formula and just copy it because it works pretty well. You're going to refine the details to like your situation and your subject matter expertise. But first thing we do is we do direct outreach to cover specific topics that are not going to be covered by existing pool of writers. So let's say that I'm trying to write something about load balancing in Kubernetes. What I do is I go to Dev.to and I go to Medium. These are two common blogs where programmers write articles, and they're just doing it for fun on the side. I look up Kubernetes load balancers and I see who's written an article in the last couple of years about Kubernetes and load balancers. And then I go look up that person. Like, is this somebody who might write an article for pay? Is this somebody who did they maybe become a freelancer or consultant recently, which might indicate they want some visibility in the community? Are they working for a big company that's not going to let them write articles outside of the big company? You have to sort of weigh these things, but essentially you just reach out to these people and see, hey, I liked your article. It was really well written. Would you be interested in writing something for us? We can pay you a little bit for it, and we'll get your byline out there to our X 100 readers or 1,000 readers or whatever we've got. So that's part one. The next is there are some really good places where you can share an open application form for community writers to join your program. So the one that I help maintain is called Community Writer Programs on GitHub. Again, you can get this link from the presentation, but if you search for GitHub Community Writer Programs, you're going to find it, I think. And what we've done is we've collected probably 50 or 60 companies that pay freelance or software developers to write articles for them. And they work in different ways. Some companies ask that developers pitch them ideas. I personally think that gets you very unfocused content that is not necessarily going to hit you towards your content goals that you have, but it can be a good way to get interesting input from the community that you might not have otherwise gotten. And because you're giving free reign for people to pitch their own topic ideas, you might come up with some weird combinations you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So it's not a bad idea, but I think it's less focused and less directed towards real sort of higher level strategic goals for content marketing. But this is a great place to go put your application form up. You can kind of put a link to it. You can say how much you pay or the range that you pay writers. It's completely free. It's open source. So assuming you have a GitHub account, you can just go create it now. And if you don't, I'd be happy to help you out. Just let me know and I can submit a pull request for you. Okay, and then the last thing we do, once we start getting applications in, it took us a couple months before we really got like good applications. I'll be honest, like when you put it out there in a public place like this that is known by developers, you're going to get a lot of low quality applications to sort through. And you do have to figure out a way to sort through that. We'll get to that in a second. But once we started to get some good applications, what I started to do was send out a weekly email of all the topics we wanted covered for that week. And so that goes out to our whole pool of writers today, like every Monday, and they respond back and they tell us, hey, I know about this topic. I'd love to write about it. Here's why. or they just tell us like, this sounds like an interesting one I'd like to learn about maybe. Could I pick this one up? And then we get our topics distributed that way. Of course, we always have more, our goal is to always have more writers than topics, but then every now and then we get one that we can't match with somebody. And that's when we go back to the recruiting aspect and we basically go look for somebody who's written about this topic in the past. Okay, so I'm halfway through. So I wanted to take a quick break for questions in case anybody has a burning question they want to know the answer to now before I move into the next section. Okay, no burning questions.
This is Pierre. I like what you what you've shared so far. It's really good.
Thanks, Pierre. Okay, I'll just keep going then. I think there's some comments in the chat too. I just saw those, but I haven't looked.
Yeah, Carl, Brian asks, what do people pay for articles? What is fair value?
Good question. And I'll touch on this more in the next section. But the rate that I see on these community writing programs is between $100 and $500 per blog post. Those blog posts are typically in the 500 to 1,500 or 2,000 word range. And some require the writer to also submit a whole like demo application in code. So that's why there's partly that's the reason for the range. And partly the reason for the range is how the economics of the company you're writing for. So for example, if you want to go write for a publication like Smashing Magazine, which doesn't have they don't have a product they're selling, the rate is a little lower, but they're also really interested in pushing out lots of like a high volume of content. And they're okay with like beginner level content. So a lot of people start with places like Smashing Magazine and then maybe move to some of the more focused, harder to write for places that pay a little more later as they get into more of this. If they're serious about freelancing, they're doing it more than just as like a kind of side hustle. What's interesting too, though, well, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm definitely going to talk about economics of this coming up because there is more to think about there. But let's get into that. Okay, so first things first, before you start bringing people on, I like rubric-based hiring. I don't know if, again, this probably goes to my like nerdy organized side. Like a couple of years ago, I worked for an ed tech startup and we did all our hiring based on rubrics. There's a book called Recruit Rockstars that's really good. It talks about having a really disciplined approach to recruiting and hiring and evaluating candidates rather than just doing it off gut feel or read one article and you think, that sounds pretty good, let's do it. So use a rubric. And then second thing, if you do take cold applications, ask for unedited samples on a topic the writer maybe can pick or that they didn't know or that you could suggest to them. What we used to do is just like look at a writer's published samples and think, okay, they're a pretty good writer. We realized though that a lot of places that publish articles by these engineers have done heavy editing. And so the sort of the content we got from that writer was vastly different from what they had showed us in their samples. So anybody who's worked with professional writers may already know this, but I think this is just like, this was to me a big revelation, especially because these technical subject matter experts are not necessarily writers first. They may not even necessarily be English speakers first. So you've got to think about those things and weigh that trade-off. Another thing that we found really helpful was giving very specific guidance to writers. One thing I didn't realize, again, because I had kind of been writing for 10 years on the side, I'd gotten pretty good at organizing my thoughts and coming up with a flow that made sense. I would write an article based just on a title. And a lot of times that was good enough because I was pretty intuitively kind of understood it at that point in my career. But when I started hiring other writers, I started giving them a title and a one-sentence description of the article. And as you can imagine, the quality varied very widely. A lot of very low quality and just way off topic stuff started coming in. And I was staying up late doing like total rewrites of everything. And I'm just realizing this is not the way to do this. I need to come up with a better solution. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and I started looking into what professional content marketing people do. And what I found is almost all of them create a brief. We create briefs and outlines now for every piece of content before it comes in. So what that means is we actually have another role in our process called like a content researcher that does the upfront research and decides how to organize the article at a high level that clients approve before we then get a writer to actually write it. But what this does is it gives the clients a really good idea of what they're going to get. And then it also gives the writer a really good idea of what they're shooting for. So whether or not you work with us, if you just go hire writers and you just give them like, here's an idea for an article, go write it. just know you're going to get a really wide variety of quality and like focus, and it's going to be all over the place. If you instead take maybe 30 minutes to put together a pretty decent brief or outline, you're going to get way better quality, at least structure of articles. Now, whether you have to go edit them heavily, that's the next topic. So I'll get to that. Okay, so I realized quickly as well, you have to invest pretty heavily in editing when you're working with subject matter experts around the world who, again, may or may not be, they may know their craft very well. They may know software engineering very well. They may not know how to edit. So my ideal is that when we think about the total cost of an article, I would love 60 to 70% of that cost to go to the writer as payment for their work. That's ideal. And then the rest goes into editing. We do a little design and custom illustrations and things. But like, basically, I want most of it to go to the writer. Now, in reality, what can happen is it's more like 50-50. Like we spend about half our budget on editing and about half on the writer. And that's not ideal, but it's like pretty standard, and you're going to find a lot of that. And then there's the uh-oh moments where you get one that you spend like, you don't pay the writer too much, but you realize you have to spend 20 hours editing the piece, which is basically just like completely rewriting it. This can be really painful, especially if you go back and forth on multiple revisions, or if a writer really, really misses the point and you have to kind of start it over, rematch it to another writer. And so anyway, just be aware that editing costs are a big part of your total cost for each article. So when we talk about economics, let's say you pay a writer $300 and you're paying an editor $50 an hour to edit for a good senior editor. And maybe you pay more, maybe you pay less. I find that editors who can read and edit these technical pieces, and they don't have to know the technical, they don't have to know all the technical details, but they have to be able to read around the language and be pretty good at that. They tend to be on the more expensive side of editors. And I think that's fair. That's a pretty difficult job. But basically what we're going to do is spend $300 for the writer, and then maybe spend another, could be $300 for an editor to go back and forth a couple times on revisions with the writer or rewrite big sections of it. That adds up. I mean, this is how it gets really expensive to produce some of these pieces of content. Now, obviously, all this is pretty variable. If you're only producing, let's say, like 2 pieces a month, it's pretty low volume. You could probably find 1 or 2 pretty good writers who are consistently good that can get you that content, and that can save you a lot on editing. So you may want to like quickly rotate through several writers to get to a couple that are really good, and then just hold on to them as long as you can, and realize that you're saving money on editing, so maybe it's worth compensating them a little more in the front end. Now, when it comes to compensation, money is not the only motivator for these people who are full-time software engineers, especially if they're US based, but even around the world. You have to think they're making pretty good money as software engineers. Your few $100 that you pay for the article is not changing their financial situation materially in most cases. Now, there's exceptions to that. We actually work with some people who do this basically full-time in parts of the developing parts of the world, like India and Nigeria. Great English writers, great software engineers and technical people, but they just want to write. And so they make it work. So it does depend, but generally speaking, most of the people you find are not doing this for full-time income. They want bylines because that gives them recognition in the community, gives them the ability to showcase their work for future, when they're going through a job application in the future. They want to learn new things. So if you're pushing them and giving them topics that are just slightly outside their comfort zone, they actually might appreciate that more than you realize. They're not in this for the easy, quick buck. They're looking at this as an investment in their careers. So kind of appeal to that kind of engineer that wants to write that kind of stuff that gets them ahead. And then they also like working with cool products. So our easiest to match articles are ones from open source companies that are building something that is publicly available on GitHub. Writers love that because it's kind of it's a cool idea to be featured in an open source company's blog. So if you have those kinds of things, use them to your advantage. Or if you have a cool product that's really well received in a certain niche, you can get away with sort of paying writers a little less and finding better writers because they're really interested in your product. Okay, and then last section here is reaching a technical audience. So this is, I'm a big believer that even if social links don't directly contribute to SEO, like having articles that actually pick up steam on social media do tend to attract backlinks from things like newsletters, industry publications. They just tend to get shared more. So it's like an important, I kind of look at SEO as like that little juice you can give an article before it like hopefully goes into the long tail SEO life cycle of growing steadily over time. So the first thing you need to do is get to know the niche social networks that work for your audience. Now, again, my audience is mostly software and data engineers. So the places we go are like Hacker News, Reddit, Stack Overflow. There's a ton of industry newsletters out there. If that's your audience, great. If you're more in some other kind of engineering or technical fields, you'll have to go find where those people hang out and talk. There are a lot of places on the internet, and it's sometimes hard to find these places. A lot of Slack communities now, I see that as a big up and coming thing, or Discord communities. So you might want to check those out. There's even some communities that kind of they almost operate in the GitHub issues section, which is a little bit strange, but it can, for certain open source tools, it can be like a central hub for information to get shared. So go find those places and get out there in front of them. Figure out what it's like to promote on those places, because it's a little tricky sometimes. And then once you get good at that, it can be a great way to drive traffic. The other thing you can do is syndicate your content. This is really easy and free, and people way underutilize it. But Dev.to is a free place where you can syndicate content, have a canonical link back to your original. Medium, the same way. You can syndicate things with a canonical link back to the original. And even if these things don't send you direct SEO value necessarily, they are absolutely places where developers are reading content regularly. So you're going to reach more audience regardless. And then the other thing that our clients who get the most value out of every piece of content do is they repurpose content in several different ways. So this is a standard practice across a lot of content marketing, but I think it's also worth noting it works in technical content as well. So maybe you wrote a tutorial and you've got a bunch of code samples. You can put them in a GitHub repository and have them publicly available to help developers who actually want to pull the code and use it directly. You can sort of slice that guide up into several tweets and post those out and mention all the different tools that you talk about in the guide, things like that. I mean, it's all the standard stuff that you can do with promoting content, but it still works in developer content. Okay, so that's what I got today. We came up with ideas. I know we covered a ton, and I feel like I could not possibly do it justice in 30 minutes. So there's probably more questions and things that you want to talk about. Feel free to ping me. We came up with topic ideas. We talked about finding subject matter experts, managing and motivating creators, and reaching technical audience. What else would anyone like to know? And feel free, if you don't have time now, to just ping me, shoot me an email. Happy to talk after. But thanks again for the time and coming and joining.
Hey, Carl, this is Kathy. I've got a quick question. So I'm 3 weeks into my job, and they've been putting out a ton of technical content. And, it certainly gives us street cred, for one thing. We work with Google and Amazon, so also gets us, some visibility with them. But in my mind, it's not the right audience, right? Like, they're not the decision makers. I need to get to the, probably director, VP of infrastructure, that sort of thing. And just want to know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you sort of break the topic twice for two different audiences, or, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so very good question. Your audience does matter. I totally agree. And there's there's different approaches, right? So there are companies that have tried the bottoms up content approach. SendGrid is one that is pretty well known. Twilio, they wrote a lot of developer focused content. And then what they hoped was developers would bring this to their boss and say, hey, could you, maybe implement this tool? So path A is you just write the developer focused content in hopes that it causes developers to sort of cry out to use it from their bosses, right? So that's legitimate, but it also is a, what would I call this? This is kind of a less traditional approach, maybe. It's like a lot of startups do it with this feeling of being very grassrootsy, and that's kind of that's their whole brand almost. For more enterprise companies, and we work with a couple enterprise clients that would not do that sort of strategy. It's just not in their DNA. And I think that's viable too. But what we do for them is typically we'll write content from engineering managers or architects or decision makers who talk about, say, the pros and cons of different architectural decisions or tools. So an example that comes to mind, we recently wrote a couple articles for a company called Fabric that does a headless e-commerce platform. And we wrote some articles about migrating from other common e-commerce platforms to Fabric and why you might do it. So they're not aimed at how to do it. It's more about the higher level, how would you decide whether this is the right move for you or not? And we genuinely point out the pros and cons. There are legitimate cons with our client. And so you got to point that out if you want to have a legitimately interesting and authentic article. But at the same time, there's a very valid case for it for certain situations, especially their target customers. So That kind of higher level content is definitely can be written by technical people, but those kind of people, you're gonna have to go search out a little more. Like they're not gonna be the standard entry level engineer who might apply for this cold. These are the kind of people I would go reach out to on Dev.to and Medium, and I would ask like anyone you know in software development, hey, do you know senior developers who like to write articles, or engineering managers who like to write articles? Like you got to hunt those people down a little more.
Carl, I have a follow-on to that question, and you're getting a lot of compliments in the chat, by the way. Some people had to drop off, but they highly complimented your talk. So what about I could see a lot of what you went through today reaching individual contributor software engineers or even software engineering managers. If we wanted to reach the VP of engineering who he or she might be 2 or 3 levels up, do you change your approach at all?
Yeah. So there's a whole nother field. We actually we sort of aim at we probably write a little bit for directors. Most of our stuff is aimed at managers. There's a whole nother field though that does executive ghostwriting and thought leadership. That's the kind of writing I would probably aim for. And I would probably aim to get those stuff rather than publishing on your personal blog, which has very limited reach, I'm imagining, or your company blog, which probably has limited reach. It's probably just read by like customers and then long-term SEO. These people aren't going out and Googling like, how do I hire a great engineering director? Like I don't know that anyone Googles that term. But they are reading industry publications. So you can go to places like the News Stack and you can buy a sponsorship on the News Stack and get your articles syndicated there every month. And that is read by technology leaders. So there's things like that you can do. And for that, I would have someone with authority at your company actually writing the articles, or ghostwriting, having someone ghostwrite for that authority person. So you basically go and have your CTO write a think piece about why your paradigm shifting yada yada is changing the world of tech. And you get that in the industry publications, trade publications, even things like Forbes that take, they'll take guest contributions. Because those are likely where those C-level and director, the really higher level ups are reading things. And so it's all about knowing your audience and what they're reading. It's probably just like, I don't know, the answer for everything in content marketing: know your audience and know where they're at and go find them, like get in front of them. But yeah, that's what I would do.
Okay, thank you. Todd, do you have a question? I see you're unmuted.
No? Oh, I'm always unmuted. Well, so going back to that, the editing, and sometimes the writer, it looked like in that one graphic, writing actually maybe got down to 1/3 of the overall cost, which I totally, I've been there, I could see that happening. It seems to me the more deep technical the topic gets, the more that would be the case, and just, it's okay to plan for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's built in, like we build it into our margins. That's, it's like, it may seem like, I don't know. It's like, there's different markups when you are dealing with subject matter experts as your writers than if you were dealing with professional writers as your writers. I totally agree. And you have to build that in your cost structure, whatever you want to do. It is interesting though, like you say that senior people you would think would be worse, or maybe the really experienced people with really deep knowledge might be worse at writing. I actually don't know that that's the case though. A lot of times those people have gotten to where they're at because they're good communicators as well as being good technical people. So what's interesting is a lot of our best writers are actually some of our most senior as well. It's like there's maybe a correlation there, or maybe it's like if you are a deeply technical person and you've written on the internet, you keep doing it because you get positive feedback. There's like a positive feedback loop there, something happening. I don't know. That'd be interesting to like study why that's the case.
So what you're saying is you're not quite as, because you're talking about yourself there, right?
Right? I'm in that, right. Like I'm the kind of writer I would want to recruit. Yes. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the focus is developers or development for software development. If you kind of come and say, okay, I have this particular side of the industry, like I'm very worried about, I don't know, identity access controls. I don't know, something specific, right? Do you go out and try to find somebody who has some expertise in that specific kind of niche of
Yeah.
say, cybersecurity or something that's the particular type of technology?
Yeah, that's what we do. What we do is when we bring on a new client, we do a lot of planning ahead of time so that we know what topics they want us to cover and how like high level they need to be versus like really specific. And when we have all the topics from the client, we then go start the recruiting process immediately. So we're like just going to work finding people, and it can be tough sometimes. I mean, honestly, there's been 2 or 3 where I was just like tapping deep into my LinkedIn network, trying to bug people that might be writers, like it's not always easy for those really specific topics. But again, like kind of going back, the goal is authority and actual subject matter expertise and actual like credibility and trust building. Like you kind of have to just invest in finding people that can do that. And the other thing you can do though is most companies that have something, if you have something really, really specific, you can always just tap your existing engineering team and try to get them to either let you ghostwrite for them or get them to write something and then clean it up. That can also be really good. It shows off your expertise too as a company.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
I got a question for Margie.
Yeah.
I've got a question for Margie. This is off topic. As an ex-sailor, I got to know, where did centerboard marketing come from?
I wish I was more of a sailor. Yes.
Aspirational.
We help you through turbulent, rocky waters.
Okay, cool. That's where it came from, though, at least. Okay. Sorry, Carl, I just had to ask her.
I'm done.
You can implement us when you need us, but not all the time.
I love it. No, thanks so much, everybody. Yeah, feel free to follow up if you have questions. Craig had a question, actually. How do I find clients?
Hey, Carl, this is Pierre. I really thought it was a great presentation. And I think you covered a lot of the, having written on analytics, you get asked a lot balancing between the marketing part and then the tags and the technical part and trying to figure out not to go down the weeds like we were talking about at the beginning. I thought you really did a great job with the presentation. Just want to say that.
Thanks, Pierre. I'll answer Craig's question. How do I find clients? Mostly referrals and mostly social media. Those are the two big ones.
Right.
If you want to email me, I'll send you. I've written a couple things about that just on my personal blog, so I'm happy to share.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, cool.
All right, Carl. Thanks so much. You're getting continued raves in the chat, so thanks for your talk. I see that now.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you soon.
Okay, signing off. Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care.